Okay, this is calculus 3.2.3, number 3. All right, so we're going to go through the product rule. And the product rule is as such: f of x times g prime of x plus f prime of x times g of x. These two are, of course, transposed in your book, but I just like to write it this way. Now, we're going to do this a couple ways. One my way, one the book way. We're going to start with the book way. Okay? So, the one thing I want to do first is I want to adjust the problem so that it has exponents. So, h of t can be rewritten as t to the 1/2 times 1 minus t squared. Okay? And so, if I take the derivative of f of x, so f of x prime is going to be 1/2 t to the negative 1/2, right? And then, so if that's brown, let's go with green. So g of x prime, let's put it up here. I have space later. Well. Alright. Need that little bit of space. There we go. G of x prime, g prime of x would be equal to negative 2t. Alright?
Yeah.
We all good? In the hood? Wrong one. Cool. Alright.
Another one start tonight.
So, if I want to organize them, the way I'm going to write them is I'm going to write the originals in purple and the others in their color. Okay? So the originals, f of x is going to be t to the 1/2, right? And then g prime of x is going to be negative 2t. So times negative 2t. And that's where I get that. Alright, so then I'm going to add. And I got f prime of x is going to be f prime of x. Wait a minute. I did f prime of x, didn't I? No, that's right. Okay. Not bad. Alright, f prime of x is going to be brown, right? F prime of x is going to be 1/2 t to the 1/2 negative. Okay? And then, I'm so glad. Williams. Hey. Right in the middle of video in, but then after. I know. Both were here last hour. Both are here this hour. Okay. Jody, put your attendance, man.
I don't mind.
Oh my goodness. I'm not answering that. Okay. So, oh, you did yours?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was young. I am just a messenger. Okay, so, what are we doing?
So wouldn't you multiply?
Where am I?
Yeah.
Oh, I have to do g of x. There's a stop in the middle of it. Alright, so we're going to keep that as purple, right?
Yeah.
So g of x is just going to be 1 minus t squared. Okay? Alright, so now we got to kind of do everything. Okay? So when we multiply these, we worry about the t's. Now remember, this has a 1 on it, right? That's t to the first power. So when I multiply these two together, let's go with red. When I multiply these two together, the negative 2 stays there, right? But the t, 1 plus a half is 1.5, right? So we're going to write that as t to the 3 halves, okay?
3 over 2 is half.
3 over 2 is 1.5, right? Okay, so when we add 1 plus a half, we get 1.5, which is the same as 3 halves. Is that correct? Everybody feel me on that? Okay? Now, as we multiply this through, times 1 is easy. It's just the same thing. It's 1/2 t to the negative 1/2, right? But then you take 1/2 times the negative, means that it's minus 1/2, right? And then t to the negative 1/2 plus 2 leaves 1.5, right? So 3 halves. Okay? So it'll be t to the 3 halves.
Would it be negative? That's a negative half though.
Yes. But remember, negative half plus 2 is 1.5. Does that make sense? Good. And 1.5 is 3 halves. We good so far?
Yeah.
Alright. So, then what? Like, we should be done, right? But
Collect like terms.
we want to collect like terms. And we kind of want to put them together appropriately. Now, appropriately is a loose term, as you'll find out. So, basically, which terms have the same,
Negative 2t, 3, negative 2, and then.
right? This one and this one have the same power, right? So those are the ones that we can actually add. Okay? So what is negative 2 plus negative 1/2?
Negative 2.5.
Negative 2.5. Good. So basically, instead of negative 2 and 1/2, could I rewrite that as negative 5 over 2? Is that cool? Okay? So that's just on the side, just kind of, as I add these two up, that's negative 5 halves. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I got negative 5 over 2, right? And t to the 3 halves. Now, remember, let me rewrite this again. T to the 3 halves, that's 1.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's a half? Remember? What's it? So that's t to the 1 plus a half of a t, right? A t to the 1/2 is actually a radical, right? It's a square root. Does that make sense? So these are the same. We agree? Okay? That means that I have t times t, the square root of t. Does that make sense?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go over it one more time.
Which you told me before.
So, 3 halves, right?
Yeah.
How many times does 2 go into 3?
Huh?
How many times does 2 go into 3? Once. So that's 1t outside the box. In other words, you got basically the square root of t cubed, right? So remember, that means you got t times t times t.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we can take 1 out. Got it?
Makes sense, yeah.
Alright, cool. Alright. So there's people who are out there wondering the same thing. Alright, so that's good. What's next? Well, we add this, but then remember, it's 1 over 2, right? And then t to the negative half. So what happens to the negative? If I have negative 1/2,
Go to the bottom.
it goes to the bottom, right? Boom. And I turn it into a regular half, right? But then a half is really a square root, right? So then it's going to come down to the bottom as a square root of t. Does that make sense? How we bring this is really a square root of t, right? But we're going to bring it down below. So first we got to bring it down. So we have 1 over t to the 1/2. Then we say that that's the same as t.
Would it be 1
square
over
root of t.
2?
Yes, 1 over 2. And then that's really, because the 2's here, and then the 1's there. So it's just 1 over t, the square root of t. And so that's what we're doing. We're putting t down below with 2. Does that make sense? Now, now I'm looking at it going, well, there's 2 things we can do here. Personally, I didn't want a t in the bottom, right? So what I would do is I'd multiply a square root of t over a square root of t, right? Which something would occur here. You'd have the square root of t on the top, right? Over 2t. Does that make sense? Because we're just making this go to the top, and then this shadows the bottom. Remember when we take a radical to the top, a shadow is left on the bottom. Remember that? Way back when? If I have, let's say 3 over the square root of 4, then I can go, oh, I'll bring this up and make that equal to 3 square root 4 over 4. Remember that? Because the shadow's left down below. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's all I'm doing right here. But if I want to add these, then this 2 has to have a t in front of it. To have a t in front of it, I have to multiply it by a t. But to multiply it by a t legally, it has to be t over t, which is 1. It's just manipulation. So, what happens now is you get negative 5 t squared, square root t, over 2t. And then you're adding those 2 things. Do you see what happened there? What's t times t?
T.
No.
Squared.
Yes. And then t times 2?
2.
T. Alright, you got it. So, I was like, add those 2 up.
Okay, I'm going to write that down.
I'm going to add these 2 up. And then I go, oh, right, okay. And then I go, oh, isn't there a 1 in front of this? 1 square root t. But these aren't the same, right? So since they aren't the same, I can't add them. So basically, all I do is go negative 5t squared, square root t, plus the square root of t all over 2t. I'm just combining. Put these together, just putting this, boom, boom, and then it's all over t. And that's my answer. Okay, then I look in the back of the book.
Wait, how come the bottom don't add together?
Because of the denominator.
They never do.
The denominators stay the same.
Think of this, a over 2 plus b over 2 is equal to a plus b over 2.
Okay.
Right? It's okay. Good questions. All right. So, when I looked in the book said, this is the book's answer. One minus 5t squared over 2t, 2 square roots t. This is the book's answer. Now what did the book do?
Divide by square root t.
It left the square root in the bottom, didn't it? Okay? So what if we didn't, leave the square root in the bottom? Or what if we multiply the bottom like we did here by the square root of t and the square root of t. Right? That would mean everybody on the block gets the paper. So you get the square root of t minus 5t squared over 2t. Right? Is that the same as this?
Wait, what? What is that?
Is this the same as that?
Doesn't look like it.
It doesn't, does it? What's different?
There's no square root t.
What goes first?
The exponent.
We always go in descending order, right?
Yeah.
So then that would be negative 5t squared, right? Plus, because there's a plus here, plus 1, plus the square root of t all over 2t. Now, does that look the same?
Nope.
What?
There's another.
Oops, my bad. Oh. Square root of t times 5t squared. My bad. Thank you for saying no, because you were right. Now does it look the same?
Yep.
Alright. So this actually had the square root of t on there because it's square root of t times this, square root of t times that. So that square root of t is there, right? I forgot to write it. Okay?
That's embarrassed.
So, yeah, I'm recording this. I'm so embarrassed. Alright. Alright, so that's that, right? But what about, remember, buying didn't work on the second problem for some reason? Alright, so we're like, does mine work? And I'm like, I'm going to see. So, let's multiply. What is 1/2, t to the 1/2 times 1? T to the 1/2, right? What is t to the 1/2 times? So when you multiply, you actually add, right? So that would be plus,
2/2.
which is
2.
5 over 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But this would still be minus. That didn't change. Okay. Does that make sense? That this is h of t, but we multiplied it through. We said times and times. Is that right? You agree? Boom.
Wait, what?
T to the 1/2. Boom. T to the 5/2. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Let's take the derivative. So h prime of t is what? 1/2 t to the negative 1/2, right?